Well, I just want to thank everybody who put a whole lot of work into making this possible. Garrett and Chris especially, who is no longer here, for putting in all the legwork, and Garrett and Larry and Mariano for handling all the logistics here on the ground and getting all the presentations taped. I don't know if you've been told, but everyone who's here will actually be receiving a free DVD of all the presentations and any you missed. So, yay. Yay, those guys. And thank you all for coming. I mean, this is really like the core of the CakePHP community as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of you have been here since the beginning. You're in IRC every day. You're on the mailing list helping out with the news. So thank you guys. We wouldn't be here, obviously, without any of you. So thanks a lot. With that said, because with that said, now I want to explain to you what I mean by this, because this kind of doesn't apply to most of you, but it sort of explains my philosophy when I come across kind of grumpy on the mailing list. So this might kind of explain it, and I'm going to try and get to what I really mean by this in this presentation. It's just an explanation of kind of our philosophy behind things and why we do it the way we do. Can you hear me now? Is that, yeah? Good. Okay. So this is a picture of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And what does this have anything to do with anything that I'm talking about right now? Well, this was a major nerve center during the Cold War for the CIA when they would try and get operatives or officials of the Soviet government to provide information to the United States, basically committing treason. And they had an acronym for the basic motivations that they could use to get these people to do that. And I found that this acronym applies surprisingly well to people who are motivated to contribute to open source. The first one is money. This has worked for a lot of open source projects and companies who base their businesses on open source. MySQL just got bought. Red Hat stock is finally on the rise. People have made it work. And so that's a legitimate motivation. I don't want to discredit them or or say that they're trying to take advantage of other people's hard work. Because oftentimes the open source companies are the ones building their products to get their name out there. Next one is ideology. It's one of my favorites because these guys are true believers. They go out there thinking, yeah, they've got this egalitarian idea that everybody's got something to contribute and give back and make the world a better place. I think that's possible, but in practice, I'm a little more cynical than that. The next big one is revenge. Revenge is actually the cause of a lot of fork projects, like the Kohana project, which was a fork of CodeIgniter, for example. Those guys went and said, you know what, we can do it better. And so we're going to show you guys. And that actually ties into the last and most important motivation, which is my personal favorite. Obviously, anyone who is, and this applies especially to the PHP community, because as a whole, not you guys. If it applied to you as much, you wouldn't be here, I don't think. But the pervasive mentality in the PHP community seems to be, my problems are so special and so unique that no one else's framework has ever covered or addressed them. So I'm going to build the framework, and I'm going to spew it on the world so that you can witness my glory. No. At this point in the web development industry, I would say that there aren't a whole lot of new ideas about how to get things done. There are a few, and I saw a few of them here this week, which I was really impressed by, I got to tell you guys. But in general, there's not going to be a whole lot better patterns or philosophies than what's already out there. So, and chances are that most of the people who are gung-ho about building their own frameworks don't have any of them. If they did, they would be smart enough to recognize a lot of these patterns and practices are already embodied in existing projects. So ego is kind of a blessing and a curse, because it's a good motivator to actually get stuff done, but it's a good motivator to get stuff done, a lot of which already has been. So why am I here? Screw it. So in early 2005, and maybe a little earlier, I heard about the whole Rails hype, as I'm sure most of you did, and I thought, surely there must be something like this available for PHP. Not so much. Not so much, I found. I found a couple of projects. Cake was really not very far along at all when I found it, but it was, I would say, the farthest along when I found it of any of the other existing solutions available. So I thought, I'll give this a shot and see what happens. So I committed some patches. People said, this code looks pretty good, and I was accepted onto the team. And the rest is history. And what really got me hooked was other people looked at my code and said, this is pretty good stuff. Up till then, I had never contributed to an open source project, so I kind of got hooked on this feeling that, other people out there in the world think this stuff that I'm doing is a good idea. So that goes back to the whole ego thing. And when I saw this project, I came from, as most PHP developers did, kind of hacking my way through each of individual project. And the stuff that I was able to get accomplished with Cake just shocked me. I was in shock. The first 2.5 weeks, I really fought against the convention because, like most PHP programmers, I was used to doing everything free form and not really according to any set structure. So I fought against it for a little while, but once I found my groove, it was amazing. And what amazed me even more was I kept finding new things, having new paradigm shifts, even into 1-2 years of doing this project. So it's really been an amazing experience. So what do I do on this project? What do I see my role as? Well, first of all, I architect. People come in with ideas. I have ideas of my own, and I have to figure out how to make those ideas best work within the overall structure of the framework. And of course, that's not just me. Any big decisions related to the framework, we have a team and we discuss them. We discuss these ideas, and everybody kind of has their input, and because of that, the ideas are the better for them. But what this first point has to do a lot with is the second point, which is I act as a filter. As many of you, I'm sure, have seen on track, we get hundreds and hundreds of enhancement tickets. And a lot of this stuff, while it might be a good idea, is not necessarily right for the framework or doesn't necessarily need to be in the framework because it's easy enough to implement in your own applications, or it's not general enough to be implemented in a framework that's for general web applications. Or it's just not a good idea. Some of those happen too, let me tell you. So on the team, between the three of us, Garrett and Larry and I, we fight a lot. But I consider this a good thing because most of the time it's not vicious or malicious. It's just we have different ideas and we all come from really different backgrounds. And so we fight it out about stuff, and that's really a good thing because in the end, it ends up with the best product possible because it's been fought out. It's been sort of through a mental trial by fire through these debates that we have. And so we weed out all the potential issues before something gets implemented. And that's a really important part of our process. And like I said, I have learned so much in the 2.5 years that I've been working on this project. In fact, I can safely say that compared to where I am right now, when I started with Cake, I was an idiot. I didn't understand anything about these patterns. Once I found it and started working with it, I sort of intuitively understood that this is the way things should be, but it took me a little while to get to that understanding. So when I started with this project, I was not anyone special. I just kind of had a little bit of a sense of how things should work, and I started getting more of a sense of it as time went on. So here are some kind of my quotable cliches that define a little bit of how I think about doing code and integrating it into the framework and managing the framework as a project. This is a really big one, because a lot of times people will come to us with these ideas that they haven't actually implemented in their own projects. They'll just say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? Well, why don't you just do it, and then we'll see if it's cool or not. And we try and strike a balance between things that people actually use commonly versus things that just seem like a good idea and would just end up bloating the framework in the end. This goes back to the whole filtering idea. We do our best to filter out stuff that's not going to be useful or only going to be useful to a limited subset of people or a limited subset of times or instances or applications that you're going to want to develop. Also to do with filtering. If you add all these features that all these people are requesting, you end up with a bloated, unfocused mess. See the Zen framework. This one's one of my favorites. Again, going back to this whole, the PHP community mindset, they think everyone comes in with this idea that their problems are so special that they can't be solved in the same way that everybody else is solving their problems. YouTube, I think, was actually a classic example of this. They were giving some presentations back at OSCON showing about how they scaled and how they solved all these problems, when everyone else who was there from these other big companies were like, come on, guys, we solved these problems years ago. Why are you just now figuring this out rather than taking the work that's already been done and not having to rediscover it? And just for emphasis, since this one's so important.
You are not special. You are not a beautiful or unique snowflake. We are the all-singing, all-dancing crowd of the world. You are not special. You are not a beautiful or unique snowflake.
Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. Because it's that important. So, kind of some quotable quotes I've come up with in my course of working on this project and dealing with the community and so on. This is a big part of the focus of the talk, which is that if you're defining your constraints, if you're defining your criteria, then someone can come to you with an opinion and you can tell them, well, no, that opinion is wrong because it doesn't fit our paradigm of thinking about web development or what have you. People have come to us with a lot of ideas that are good ideas, they just don't fit within the philosophy of what we're doing, and that's okay. We can maybe find a slightly different way to integrate them into our philosophy, but just because you've got this idea doesn't mean it's necessarily a good one for this project. So that's part of what this whole your opinion is wrong thing is about. It's not that your idea is bad, it's just that it doesn't really work for us. Ugly APIs upset me. This is a big one. There have been a lot of instances where things in Cake have grown into things that I hate. How many of you use generate list? Yeah? Show of hands, really? Just 2, 3? Okay, all right. I have come to hate generate list. That's why I got rid of it. Because everyone was trying to cram all the parameters from both generate list and find all into generate list. And it just grew into this ugly, horrible, bloated mess because it was trying to do the job of 2 methods. When I figured out that it was my problem for designing it wrong. So I kind of went back to the drawing board on that one and made everything funnel through the find method and fork out to all these different ways of manipulating the data that gets returned from find. And we also added an awesome new API for it, where everything goes straight through find and you specify the find type that you want, which I think is awesome. And it's beautiful, so it makes me happy. It's not a problem until it's a problem. This kind of goes back to the whole yank and need it, because people like to come up with these hypothetical problems and try to bring in solutions for them before they've actually been trial tested in a real application. I try and always have an app, one or two apps that I'm developing concurrently using Cake. In my job, I'm not always able to do that. It's like 50-50. So I keep projects on the side to make sure I'm staying current and relevant with what's actually needed in the framework. This is really important because it staves off the bloat and it makes sure that the things I'm putting into it are things that are actually relevant to real world applications. And that's kind of what we want to see from people who are submitting enhancement tickets, is stuff that you're using in production and it's actually making your application and development process better. So again, this is kind of an abrasive one, but it's this idea of if you're going to use this framework on most of you I think already get this one, is in order to make it work for you, you really have to kind of adopt our philosophy and play in our world. If you do, life's going to be much better for you. And I think you all recognize this already. But people sometimes forget this, and that's why their opinions are wrong. So here are some opinions that have kind of come across the pike. Some of my favorite ones over last couple of years. Wouldn't it be cool if? No. No, it would not be cool if. Don't even start a sentence with that, because that ends us up with Zen framework, and we don't want Zen framework. We don't want a collection of stuff that's going to be cool in theory. We want stuff that actually works in real applications for you guys. And I think most of you already have a pretty good handle on this. So enough said, I guess. Why can't I get the form helper magic without a model? And this really applies to just about anything in the framework. Why can't I get X magic without having to do Y work? And this is because all the, unlike, well, I won't get into other frameworks on this point, but unlike other frameworks, the components of Cake aren't just kind of glued together. They're actually architected to work together in a specific way. And you can build your own components to integrate with that flow. But in order to sort of get the advantage from these things working together, you have to start at the beginning and actually do it Cake's way in order to get these advantages. Again, I think most of you get this already, so I'm probably preaching to the choir. Tell Cake to stop hashing my passwords. It's one of my favorite ones with the auth component, because so much laziness has resulted in so many stolen passwords because they get stored in plain text. How many of you ever heard of Reddit? Reddit.com. Yeah? Do you remember what happened to them not too long ago? They had a whole database of user information, and they had their passwords stored in plain text. Well, their database got compromised, and all those user passwords got stolen. Now, they had a quote-unquote legitimate business reason for wanting this to happen, which is that if someone lost their password, they wanted to be able to email them their passwords back. Well, why not just generate them a temporary password and have them create a new one? That would have saved them this trouble that they ran into. Of course, no one counts on their server being hacked and their database being compromised, but it happens. Hence defense in depth, which is why I make you hash your passwords. Because people are inherently lazy. I know I am. I don't want to have to do extra work in order to make that happen. I just want it to work. And for the few narrow, specific, legitimate cases where I want to be able to access an unhashed password, for example, I want to make sure it's of a particular length if I'm validating it, or if I want to make sure it's the same as a confirmation password, even though I could just hash the confirmation password as well. I want to have to do extra work in order to break the rules, because having to do that extra work makes me think about what I'm doing and why. And that's really the most important thing. When we establish a convention, it's because this is our opinion that we're forcing on you. And you can tell us we're wrong, and if you've got a good argument, we'll listen to you. But generally speaking, if you're going to break the rules, you're going to have to do a little bit of work, and hopefully that work is going to make you think about why you're breaking this rule, and maybe there's a different way that you could be doing it. So, especially as it relates to security, which is the more intelligent default value? So as part of this presentation, I just kind of wanted to do a little bit of a year in review. About 13 months ago, I guess now, we released the first alpha of 1.2. And finally, almost a year later, no, exactly a year later, we got around to releasing the beta. And a lot of work went into that. And, a lot of really good ideas came in from you guys, and we on the core team integrated some stuff that we had been working on, and ideas that we had had since like 0.1 finally made it in here. So I just wanted to do a little bit of review of what we've got so far. Behaviors, that was a big one. Again, that was kind of an architectural problem that I saw. People were shoving all this code into their app models because there was really no better way to do it at the time. So I said, we're already doing this overloading with the models and just making these magic methods that don't exist. How can we leverage that to solve this problem in a more intelligent way than, or not necessarily a more intelligent way, but a more appropriate way for models than we're doing for controllers? Because for controllers we have components, and it doesn't exactly map one-to-one with how we do stuff with models. So we were able to come up with a more intelligent way to handle that in behaviors. And data sources. The model at this point is just about completely free of being SQL specific. And kudos to the people who actually figured out how to use the data source API with no documentation. Jan, you're a genius. Tom O'Reilly, you're also a genius. Although slightly less so because it's still just SQL. But no, that's cool. Yeah, so the data source API is now basically formalized, and there will be documentation forthcoming for that. So you can tie your models to other stuff. Asset filters. This is kind of a new one. I just did it like a month ago. One of the major things that were requested was a JavaScript compressor. And it's kind of hard, like prohibitively hard to write one from scratch, and because of Cake's license and intellectual property issues, we can't actually include other source code into the project. So what we did for both JavaScript and CSS is allowed you to run it through a filter on output. So all you have to do is set the asset filter configuration, and it rewrites all of your JavaScript and CSS links so that the output from those scripts on CSS files actually gets run through this filter script that you define. And that allows you to compress them, obfuscate them, cache them, do whatever you want. So. And the configure class and the app loader, we finally got rid of all those defines. I think we've got like one left. And now not only can you not have to deal with those constants, but you can also change them. You can turn off debugging for a particular action. You can turn on debugging for a particular action. You can turn off debugging for doing AJAX. For whatever you want, you can change the paths where things get loaded from. All this stuff happens dynamically now. And the syntax looks much prettier than constants, which makes me happy. The console, we saw a presentation on this earlier. The console is just cool. We're finally getting to a point where it's not just a, pithy little bake script that can generate some of your code for you. We now have a full-fledged mini console framework, really, that you can write your own console applications on. And we've got a really great tool set built out for that finally. You saw some of it this week with the schema stuff, with the console for testing your routes and models, and Bake is freaking Bake on steroids now. You do all kinds of stuff with that. And again, Bake tasks. You can actually extend and override different parts of what Bake does and what a lot of console scripts do by overriding the tasks, which are the subcomponents that make up the script. And Bake and scaffold templates. You can actually define templates for XML, for basically any kind of output type that you want to bake for your application. Or if you have custom templates that you use frequently and you want to use those, you can specify those for Bake and save yourself all that work of having to change your code every single time. And internationalization and localization. Big hand goes out to Larry, who has busted his ass to get in the necessary support for this with both getText from static files or getText style interface rather for static files, and the translate behavior and I18N code necessary for loading translations from databases. And schema generation, which Garrett and I came up with. You saw a little bit of a compare and contrast when Joel Moss was giving his migrations talk. But how this is different is that it actually leverages the power of SVN, which has already solved a lot of these diffing and merging problems that we talked about at the end of that talk. And the other benefit is you can actually, instead of dealing with YAML or XML or really any sort of configuration file at all, you deal with our schema generation exclusively through the command line and whatever database editing tool that you want to use. So we think it's cool and you should check it out.
Awesome.
Yeah. Cache engines. This is a pretty big one because this was huge for performance in a lot of applications. Initially, all we had was just writing files to the temp directory, and that was it. Well, now you can replace that, which is the newly christened file engine, with an Xcache engine, an APC engine, a Memcache engine. We have any more than that?
Model.
Oh, yes, caching to database, although sometimes that's redundant. So all these great caching engines that you can switch up and use for different parts of your application. And I mentioned before the auth component, which handles automatic login, redirection, password hashing, all these basics of authentication that you're generally going to want to do every single time. It just handles all that stuff for you. And let's say you do want to have unhashed passwords. There are legitimate reasons out there. Jeff, for example, does his authentication through Radius, and Radius handles its hashing itself. All you really have to do is extend it and override a couple methods, and you still get all that other magic. And the ACL has been refactored quite a bit. We actually pulled the tree behavior out of that code, and it's now almost too flexible, I would say. It's flexible to the point of being sort of ethereal and hard to understand. But I think later today, Jeff and I are going to do sort of a mini tutorial on that. So maybe we'll just do it in the lobby or something. So hopefully you guys will sort of understand how that's supposed to be used. HTTP authentication in the security component, which I demonstrated a little bit yesterday. This is kind of an overlooked feature in web applications, generally speaking. But it really helps if, let's say, for example, you just want to throw up a quick demo site for a client and you need to password protect it. You can add usernames and passwords in like 2 lines of code with this, rather than having to mess with HTTP files in your httpd.conf configurations and things like that. And the other major use is for password protecting REST web services, like we saw yesterday. And the form helper. This was probably one of the biggest ones for me in 1.2 because of all the magic that was added with the input method and things like that, and all the security features that we've added in conjunction with this security component. Being able to validate that the form data hasn't been tampered with, checking the just the automatic validation stuff that's been tied in even better with the model, things like that. Email. We now have an email component for handling simple and pretty advanced, I would say, email with text and HTML formats, handling attachments and so on. Cookie support, of course, always a big one. And the debugger. This was actually kind of one of my favorites early on because it's so great that you can just click on an error and get a stack trace and see the code where the error happened. That was kind of one of the more fun ones for me to do because it was quick, it was simple, and it was just really useful. And big thanks to Felix, who actually, with my help on the direction, wrote both of these classes. And that's pretty much what enables all of the client-side REST stuff that we saw yesterday. And the media view and Magic DB classes for detecting content types. This actually helps you serve different types of media files from, let's say, behind a paywall in your application. Really handy for stuff like that. It automatically sets content types for you and handles output and compression. And I guess we're adding caching. I'll take that as a yes.
You gotta speak up, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. And the tree behavior. The tree behavior is, again, was extracted from the code in the ACL. And you can now apply that to any one of your models to get tree structures in modified pre-order tree traversal format. And I tell you, this one took me days. That was one of the hardest components to write when I first did the ACL code, and I had to refactor some of it to put in behavior, and it's just a really arcane, complex thing. And I'm so glad that none of you have to deal with that now, because it was torture. Reverse routes. Yeah, another kind of personal favorite, if for no other reason than it took me like 3 rewrites to get it right. We now have routes or URLs that you can pass in as arrays, and it'll generate a reverse route based, reverse your routes and generate a URL based on that. The router has really seen a lot of improvements, and you can now do all kinds of great stuff with pretty URLs and just really short, readable, creating a short, readable structure for your site. Short, readable things make me happy. REST supports. This figures both into the router and into the HTTP socket stuff I mentioned earlier. But you are now able to fully restify your applications and serve different types of resources and accept different types of resources as input. So, dare I say Web 2.0. This is one of the big features related to that that's made it into the release. And I'm really excited about it. Again, handling different resource types through a REST interface. I showed you yesterday how to serve XML, but we've got stuff in there to serve RSS. We've got some stuff on the way for Atom. We've got JSON handling, which is really simple. And the set class. Oh man, it's so inefficient but so good. You can extract all kinds of things from arrays in a really short, simple, like 1 line of code. You can combine and reformat arrays, and it's got all kinds of stuff in there that I really wish PHP had internally, but doesn't. You can do a multi-layer or recursive merge of different arrays, and it works how I think it should rather than how array, whatever the multi-recursive array merger method or function is in PHP. I don't like how that one works, so I fixed it. And we have a new string class, which, among other things, generates UUIDs, which are useful for a lot of different things, especially if you're doing distributed databases. It also has, thanks to Larry's support for Unicode in native PHP. And as he mentioned previously, that will be getting integrated into the core by the next 1.2 release. And the XML class, useful for handling XML naturally. This one was kind of a big one because it was sort of the first initial foray into handling things other than HTML output and post data input. This was kind of the start of what kicked off the REST support in the core. And it's not as simple as, say, simple XML. This is probably one of the areas where being bound by the constraints of PHP 4 held us back a little bit, but not as much. And I think it's really simple to use, and it recently saw a complete rewrite just a couple of weeks ago, so that's working out great. And pagination, finally. This was one of the kind of first ones that made it into 1.2, and I had seen a lot of other pagination implementations out there, and they just seemed like so much extra work, and so much was being passed around and done manually that I really didn't think had to be done, and so that made me unhappy. So in my search for happiness, I came up with a really simple way of doing this where you define your pagination defaults, and you define, and that basically takes care of the rest of the stuff for you. All the URL parameters are generated automatically in the links, and those are automatically picked up by your controller, and everything just works. And you don't have to write a lot of code in order to do it, but you can if you want. Let's say you have a complex query, you can add a method to your model and handle the pagination query yourself, and still get all that extra magic of the links and the controller handling the intermediary steps. So that's about it for what we've got now. Just a quick look at where we're going kind of in the short term. More data sources. Might not see this one till 2.0, but at least in the core anyway. But we've got some people working on their own data sources, and we'll have more documentation available for building custom data sources, which is really already possible. And as we get into 2.0, that possibility will expand quite a bit, because we've got some really big plans in that department. Ditch binding and unbinding. So this is code that I actually wrote that was going to go into 1.2, but I couldn't make it backwards compatible in time, unfortunately. We'll see what happens with this one, but suffice it to say that 2.0 will see a new query syntax where you will never have to bind or unbind anything ever. Can I get an amen? And it's short and beautiful, and I promise you're going to love it. Better tools. Over the past year, we've developed a lot of the console tools that have been mentioned previously. We're going to continue with that, and you guys are already. You don't need us. Frederick and Jan with their Fred Astrano tool. That's some of the most amazing stuff I've seen yet for in terms of cake development. So we think that's fantastic, and we've got a whole console mini framework now that you can develop this stuff on, and the sky's the limit. More Cake Fest and more beer, much more beer. We've got tentative plans in the works for next Cake Fest, when to hold it, where to hold it, and so stay tuned for details on that. I think the next one's probably going to be a little less rushed, so we'll probably have a little bigger turnout and bigger space and better all around.
Perfect awareness.
And last but not least, jQuery. Actually, it's not last either. I don't know where that came from. a lot of people within the PHP community, and kind of me, I'm on the road too, although I'm a slow learner sometimes. Everybody's picking up jQuery. So what we have decided to do is, back a while ago, I came up with a new structure for writing helpers, where you could basically override. It made it possible to override any method in the helper. And the plan was for the default to be prototype, and you to be able to override that default helper with jQuery output. But I'm thinking we're probably going to switch to jQuery as the default instead. So stay tuned for that. And we've got some jQuery community folks in the Cake community now, and so get ready to see some really awesome cross-pollination in that department. I'm really excited. You should be too. Integrated Unicode, like I mentioned before, the string class, we've got a bunch of methods in there that handle Unicode stuff, and by the next release, that will all be integrated into the core. So whenever you're ready to take your applications to the next step, take them to the world, you're already going to be ready for that, and you don't have to do any extra work. The functionality will already be there. You just flip the switch and put it live. That's our goal for enabling Unicode and PHP. The docs site, as of yesterday, book.cakephp.org is live and available. And John is working tirelessly to get the current temp docs documentation into that, so that everybody can see it and be able to update it and contribute back when they find issues. And this is going to make the whole documentation process a lot more streamlined, and make it much more available and current, and all kinds of other good stuff. So stay tuned for more news on that. And inline help, sort of tying into the docs site. The debugger is going to be integrated with inline help, so that whenever the core, the CakePHP core, throws up a message saying you're doing something wrong, you're actually going to be able to have a little help link right there, and you just click on it. It'll explain what the error message is, how different people have solved it, and get different user comments on it. It'll be linked to other resources, so you'll be able to see all that right as you're developing your applications. And the package server, like I mentioned yesterday, this is going to be a big one, I think, for people being able to share code and get code that other people are sharing, because right now we really just don't have a very good solution for that. So I'm really looking forward to this one. And better community. Like I said, you guys are really the core, and we're really going to need your help going forward. Sort of inducting noobs into the process and getting them started. We really need feedback from you on how to improve our process for that, and how we can involve you guys more in that and building the community. So any suggestions you have, just let us know. Because I think we really need to step back and take a look at how we're managing the community and how we can do that better. So that's it. Again, thanks guys for coming, and thank you for all the work that you've put in, and the code that you've shared, and the ideas that you've shared, and the articles that you've published on the bakery. And yeah, we've got a couple more presentations today. My good friend Laura Thompson is here from the Mozilla Foundation. Mozilla Foundation or Corporation?
Corporation.
Corporation. I'm sorry. Gotcha. And she's going to talk about some of the awesome stuff that Mozilla is doing with Cake, and I'm really excited. She just gave me a taste of it the other day, of the kind of stuff they're running, and it's freaking insane. So I'm excited to hear about that, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the day.